Rob is on it. Rob is on it. He's getting his cardio in. So.
Okay, good. Well, maybe we'll just get.
Yeah, just get started. Just go.
I've got people. I think I'll start up here at the podium and then sit. What should I do? Sit, yeah. I'll sit.
It's up to you, Ted. You can dance if you want.
I know. It's us measurement people have such trouble making decisions. As you soon find out. We're here to talk about measurement, and when the group was talking, preparing for this, we said, well, geez, what's this the big disconnect between measurement people and brand people? How can we serve this audience was the question. And the big disconnect is we get lost in methodological discussions, and we say stuff that's completely indecipherable by normal human beings without really knowing it. And so I want to offer right now, before we even get started, the audience, if you need to throw a yellow card, okay, just say shut up, okay, or what? I want this to be more like a sort of a Wednesday evening prayer meeting where you all can just sort of say hallelujah and WTF, okay, all good expletives. So it's a small enough group we can get away with it. The only thing that as moderator I will stop you from doing is turning a question into a pitch for your company. I don't think that'll happen here, but it usually happens when we let the audience into the discussion, but I want to do that. Anyway, we have in this group, it's pretty special. This is really an awesome group of folks. I'm going to let them introduce themselves one by one, just in a quick sort of what's the company and what's their role, and maybe also how long they've been doing measurement, because we have this is a pretty deep group. So anyway, and I guess we'll skip John since unless you'd like to sort of surrogate for him, jump into his chair and change your voice and go, my name. So, Joan?
Hi, my name is Joan Fitzgerald. I'm the Vice President of Television and Cross-Media Services at comScore. comScore is one of the leading companies that tracks how consumers use the digital platforms. So that would be the PC platform, the tablet platform, mobile platform. And I was hired at the company on sort of the cusp of digital television to bring television measurement, a television perspective, into our digital measurement services. So what does this all come down to? It really comes down to how consumers use multiple platforms. What is the audience that uses multiple platforms, who uses only one platform, how do marketers effectively reach consumers across all of these new devices that are, very, very difficult to measure. We will undoubtedly get into the minutia of measurement, and that's where Ted is going to take out the hammer and say, no, stop that. But there are a lot of really fundamental measurement challenges when you're trying to track the same consumer using different devices, and that's what my job is at the company to tackle.
Big one. Jack?
I thought we were going to do John.
Oh, you want to pretend to be John? Hi, I'm John. Well,
hi.
Yeah, go ahead. We'll let John introduce himself when he decides to get off the phone.
Hi, I'm Chad Maxwell, and I am SVP of Integrated Insights with Starcom, part of SMG. I think first and foremost, I'm part of the best dinner table last night. So those of you who are at the dinner table with us, it's award-winning. Before Starcom, I was with Razorfish, and so my experience tends to be a little bit more upstream, centered on user research, traditional consumer market research, insight hooks for creative. And then I made the move over to Starcom to try to complete kind of the paid earned own model for myself. So now I'm basically chartered with transforming our research product, diversifying it a little bit, kind of as we transform from a media agency solely from planning and buying to more of an experience creation company, which most of you are playing in that space as well. So I'm really happy to be on the panel. Ted, thanks for hosting, and I'm looking forward to discussion.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Jed Meyer. I've just joined Omnicom's Annalect group. We're the digital technology and analytics part of Omnicom. And before that, I spent about almost 20 years at Nielsen doing a host of different things in audience measurement. I helped launch Net Ratings, which is the internet measurement piece of Nielsen almost 12 years ago, which is kind of mind-boggling. And I launched the set-top box services for Nielsen both in the US and in China. So I'm really excited. I joined Annalect about 2 months ago, and the reason I joined was because, just the way I look at it, there's so much change going on in the landscape, and I think there's so many interesting ways to combine data into new insights and into new observations all throughout the sort of engagement funnel for your consumers. So I'm delighted to be on this panel to share some of our perspectives with you and hopefully help you guys do your jobs better.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Sneathen with Nielsen. And what I focus on is helping brand advertisers think about the framework that we have for making advertising effective. So we have a framework that we think about called reach, resonance, and reaction. And so some of the measurement solutions that we have here that we're going to be talking about today really help with a lot with that first R, that reach R. But it's really putting all those things together to help marketers make those decisions about how much should I spend, how should I allocate my dollars, and how can I optimize my dollars across platforms in a real-time fashion. So I have a marketing strategy background, but have been at Nielsen for a few years.
Yeah, that's great. I guess I thought I'd start with the idea that things have gotten just phenomenally more complicated. Everybody kind of wants it to be like it was. Right? Can we please go back to where I had GRPs and I bought weight and television worked and it was all good? And now we have fragmentation not just across media, but across different kinds of screens. It's the same ad on a different screen, as effective, right? Same ad, but it's on a tablet now. We have different, because of mobility, the receptivity equation now creates a new dimension that you don't know, right? Is she more receptive to that Olay ad when she's in the bathtub? The answer, of course, is yes, according to ethnographers who apparently watch people taking a bath. And so you have the whole dimension of receptivity. You have devices. You have now you have the sort of phases of amplification, right? You have paid, owned, earned. What happens when my copy is really content? Another great, topic. So I think I'll just start by asking the panel. By the way, does the audience agree with that? I mean, the complexity is just like out of control. Raise your hand if you will be, if you will love us, if we even solve one tiny little bit of the complexity, if we could simplify one thing. Okay, one thing. And of course there was by the way, I'll just say, there was always a kind of complexity that we never got into. One time I went to the head of a pretty big division at Procter after doing some measurement work, and I said, about online, I said, the bad news is your copy stinks. People actually like you less when they see your ads. But the good news is no one you care about actually sees it. Okay. So with that, right? How, panel, are we going to begin to unravel this just phenomenal complexity? It's not going to be by being more anal retentive. It's going to be, and how, by the way, can these guys play in that? How can the advertisers help us make things simpler for them?
Well, I may be the voice of reassurance and reason, maybe, I don't know. But, the more things change, the more they're actually staying the same. I mean, some of our fundamental goals as marketers really haven't changed. It's just that there are so many more tools available to make those to achieve those goals. So even from the, what's one of our goals? Our goal is to reach everyone with our who we want to reach with our message. And it used to be that you had certain platforms and media types available. Now, your creative opportunities are just so much more available to you. Some of you may have seen the presentation by Adobe earlier today, and in the incredible creative work that's being done on applications and on tablets. I mean, tablets have just opened up a world of opportunity to create new messages with new meaning for your consumers. But foundationally, you know, our jobs have always been to reach our target audience, you know, at least once, maybe twice each, to create a creative message that makes sense to them, that causes them to have resonance with the brand. And you know, those kind of things really haven't changed. It's just, you know, the types of tools we have to execute on that have gotten much richer.
Yeah, I mean, I think my perspective is that we're still in the tunnel maybe of darkness of measurement, but I really do think we're seeing light at the end of the tunnel, at least from our perspective. A few years ago, we really felt there was a measurement crisis, and I think that some of the solutions that we're bringing to market really help address some of the challenge that you're facing in terms of cross-platform planning and measurement in terms of TV and online.
Yeah, but we incrementally add measures, but then somebody comes up with, you know, subservient chicken 3.0, and there's a whole new dimension to measure that makes everything more complex. In other words, is it one step forward and two steps back? Is one.
Well, I think it's a process, and you know, I would commend both Nielsen and comScore for coming out with the online GRPs, because at least that's a starting point in terms of a common metric. My point of view is you can't stop with that, though. That's an initial step, but the GRP on its own doesn't do enough service for all the engagements that you want to have with your customer and all the different ways that you're going to measure them throughout the engagement funnel, if you will. And so from my point of view, I think that's an incremental first step. I mentioned I helped start Net Ratings, and it was, I think, 1999. And there wasn't a lot of change. You know, we had page tagging, we had some other different things in terms of syndicated measurement for about 10 years. But the online GRP is sort of the first, you know, or the most recent engagement, or the most recent innovation. What I would urge all of you is to continue to push the measurement companies and yourselves for more than just that. We can't just stop with the GRP, because it's too blunt of an instrument.
But how do you make things simpler, right? So we got a blunt instrument, that's pretty simple.
Well, comparability makes it simpler, right? So to Jed's point, I mean, if you have a comparable measure in the two most important paid media that you have, doesn't that help advance the craft of measurement?
Okay, explain to me how why it's comparable. I just say one of my favorite guys, Josh Chasen, who's the chief research officer at comScore, said, you know, if you buy a reach of X on Ugly Betty, you know, pretty much X people are going to see your commercial. And if you buy a reach of X on Yahoo, you have no freaking clue how many people are going to see your commercial.
Yeah, well, that's
right. So how does that comparable? How does a GRP help that comparability?
Well,
really,
it does, because ultimately you're measuring impressions, and you know, one of the big innovations that's happened is that you can measure impressions that a consumer can actually view online now. It's one of these technologies that comScore has introduced, and I'm not doing a sales pitch up here for it. I'm just stating a fact. And you know, but what this gives us is its impressions and gross rating points across multiple platforms. Now, where's the rub? Well, is a banner ad, does that have the same value in the marketplace? And I mean value in terms of making an impression on consumers, resonating with consumers. Does that have the same value as a 30-second spot? Well, maybe not, you know, but there is some equivalency there, and I don't think that companies such as ours, as your research vendors, have done a good enough job really trying to define those equivalencies, and you know, maybe that's the next step where we need the marketers to push us a little bit, if you think that's important.
right? The planners. This all falls on the planners. So why don't you tell us how Starcom is making this all work?
Well, I had a couple things, and we have all the answers. But I think to go back to one of your questions real quick, because I think it's important, it's not always about comparing apples to apples. I think what I'm finding increasingly in the marketplace is there's more measures, what's the noise? So when we think about comparability, it's not just about comparability, but also trying to get back to, yeah, there's a lot of things you can measure, and it's not just about what's important, but the actual relationship between what you as marketers think is most important for your brand and what we can actually measure. So the noise problem is huge right now, not just a comparability problem, and I don't want to negate that. The second piece to that I think is incredibly important too is making sure, right, we talk about that alignment. And I think someone in the last panel said that a problem defined is half solved. I love that. And as measurement people, so often it's like, I just want to make sure it looks successful. I want to make sure my brand is building equity. And I don't think a lot of the traditional measures, in addition to the noise problem, are actually tuned to that. I was at a client meeting last week, and our brand tracking measures and our effectiveness and our reach measures were all inverse to sales. And the client was like, can you explain that to me? And I'm like,
Yeah, stop advertising, you'll make more money. That's
we
what the
should
data
go
says.
to social. And so, you know, I'm finding that to be more of a problem. So I think from a Starcom perspective, to your original question, I think a lot of it is about making sure we have a space for experimentation. We understand that all the old models aren't working, and really taking the risk to adopt some of the new measurement pieces. We talked a little bit about ethnography dying. I think there is a space for the human element in almost ethnographic analytics, and actually weaving that in to make sense from kind of the curds in the way, in a way.
Oh, I like it. We got curds and whey. We have
So if we're talking about measuring reach, right, and measuring impressions, you know, one thing that we also think is important is not only to measure impressions, but also to measure the frequency and the people. And so if you're measuring people on TV audiences, you're measuring people on online audiences, and you're measuring frequency, that gives you a lot of insight into the levers you can pull to optimize across platform, right? And so just as an example that we've seen, we were working with a company that if they would have just seen impressions, or they would have just seen a GRP, they wouldn't have known this, but there were some sites where they were getting 50 frequency in a week, and other sites where they were getting 5 frequency. They wanted 5, they didn't want 50. And oh, by the way, their target was 21 to 34-year-old men, and 60% of their impressions were going to women. And so, like, without that measurement, they wouldn't have known that they needed to optimize frequency, and they wouldn't have known that they needed to optimize against the people that they were targeting. So, I mean, to me, that's progress.
That's okay. Let's go. And by the way, we have want to acknowledge John, our new player, who was not informed that we were going to start early, so he's forgiven.
I apologize to everybody. That's all I have to say. I was out in the lobby and said, "You, John, get up on stage." It was like that dream you wake up in, you know, and say, "I didn't miss it," but this wasn't a dream. Right. So my inauspicious start. Thank you for accommodating that.
That's all right. We're really glad to have you. And you know, the discussion really hasn't taken. There's been no 4-letter words uttered yet. So we're not really.
Well,
on
let's
our
see what
grind.
we can do.
Yeah.
About that. Can I add one point here?
Yes, please.
Keep on going,
Please.
because impressions, frequency, and we would also say at Marketing Evolution, but I think all of us, the nirvana of measuring impact as well. You know, what we've seen marketers get their heads around in very good ways over the past decade, and especially lately across media, aspiring to this apples standard, is not just getting optimization and backing off and understanding frequency, not just raw impressions or raw GRP or TRPs, but understanding the differential impact of at least media, right? I think we'll talk about some other things here as well. And impact against what, right? Because, hey, I'm moving or not moving my brand equity measures, and marketers are often told, especially people in your organizations, head of brand, build the brand, build attitudinals, have people ring the cash register. How are they linked? Sometimes not obviously. But unless you start measuring impact behaviorally and attitudinally to combine with frequency, then you can't get your job done.
Right, but marketers would argue that they've been measuring impact for a long, long time. And I mean, one of the things that I think we've fallen into as an industry is measuring the impact of each medium separately. You know, that's sort of one of our goals, is to dissect each of the media components. And I there are marketing elements on top of that, but just talk about media for a minute. Well, can we unbundle television and digital and mobile, and can we measure the impact of each of those so I know how much money to put on each of those platforms? And maybe that's the kind of thinking we might want to kind of get away from in the future. Because our campaigns are almost never that way. We almost never have one thing going on at a time, and so it may be time to really start thinking about our effectiveness model is, measuring the entirety of the impact, and then trying to go backwards and analytically figuring out, well, was it this bundle of things, or that bundle of things, or this bundle of things?
Well,
because it's never just one thing anymore.
But that doesn't. How does that?
Isn't that marketing mix modeling though?
It sort of
Well,
is, and it doesn't acknowledge synergy either, right?
No, it does. Moving to what I think we should be doing it's all about measuring the synergy. It's not about measuring the silos. And no, marketing mix modeling, one of the goals of that is to untangle the impact of the siloed media. That's kind of like my observation in making these comments is, we should probably put a little less priority on that and a little more priority on finding those synergies.
Well, and I would argue not just the synergies, but how do we stop leading with just measurement and, to your point, the channel, and lead with the platform for what we want to do with the brand? And then from a media perspective, how do we distribute that effectively for how consumers are actually using the media and or engaging with the brand? So I know someone was talking about their kid not watching the TV program, going instantly to the mobile on the commercial. Well, we're not really tracking that effectively or understanding, to your point, Ted, right, the amplification from that or the touch point at that situation. I mean, really, that's going to be where true ethnography and understanding the why and the how of the screens is going to be way more important than just the effectiveness, so you can lead with that.
Yeah, so you just introduced a new aspect of complexity.
Shit.
Four-letter word.
Oh, there it is. Did the four-letter word.
I'm not going to let you guys off the hook. I'm a marketer. I got money. My boss hates me. My stockholders think I'm wasting their money, right? And I'm sort of split, right, as a marketer. What I really want to do is say, hey, board, we really, all that money you're putting in advertising, that really kind of does something, that really, and therefore you should promote me, right?
Well, and I mean, that's to John's point. I mean, that's why we think about it from the standpoint of what we refer to as reach, resonance, and reaction. And so you've got two levers that you can pull. You've got the reach lever to, how much is it out there? Where is it? And then you've got resonance, the quality of the creative, and is the creative breaking through? And those are really the two levers that you have to pull, right? And what you're looking for is, as you pull each of those levers, what sort of response, what sort of reaction are you getting in the marketplace? And so, there's ways to measure all three of those levers.
That's
and
pretty
it doesn't
good.
have to be that complicated.
I like that.
And add cost in there, and you've got optimization, right? And yeah,
Right,
exactly
right.
so. And not to go down a methodological path, but when you talk about synergy, and then you talk about mixed models, I don't know, maybe this crowd thinks about mixed models as something that is sort of historical and aggregate. And I don't think you're talking about that, right?
Yeah,
I mean, because our experience, and probably yours as well, has been to really get at synergy and to really get at how a marketer would work with effectiveness in comparison across media, not how a finance person would, right? You really need to have customer level data. You really have a respondent level data. You really need to know, what person was moved and why with what. And it's only then with their cross-impact exposure to be able to say, this and this work together, these three work better together, and that had synergy or didn't.
Yeah,
Because if you're working only with aggregate data, this vision is not possible.
Well,
Yeah.
but that's the big measurement challenge, though, which is the syndicated model and the model that's been used for since the 1950s when you had TV ratings first coming out. It's a decent first step with GRPs for this cross-platform. But to John's point, it falls apart pretty quickly when you're talking about lots of different campaigns and lots of different targets, and you really need to be able to scale it much more than that.
I mean, not to jargon us, but one of the things that the measurement industry talks about is single source measurement, which is where you have media exposure from the same people, or sometimes it's the same household. But the idea is that you're really trying to understand, for a consumer who is exposed both on the mobile platform, on TV, how are they different from people who are exposed only on television? And I think that's one of our main measurement challenges as an industry, you know, kind of going into the, as you said, methodology. I called it, you know, methodology minutia earlier. But putting together those kinds of research panels that are, you know, perhaps millions of people large, to really understand at a very granular level, are people using that website or that app? You know, you think about the enormity of that task, and that's really where, you know, things like big data come into play. I think there's a speaker later who's going to talk about this, but this idea of using CRM, you know, databases and bringing in, you know, big data solutions is something that, you know, comScore, among other companies, takes very seriously, because it really, we need that level of detail in order to make our decisions.
Well, I think that the opportunity there is there's a lot more precision. That, you know, that again, GRP is a great starting point, but you know, in terms of the future, Google just came out with this thing called TrueView, and in TrueView, you know, basically what they're doing is saying you're only going to pay for the people who actually, you know, saw the actual video commercial, and this isn't a banner, and this isn't search, it's an actual.
No, you're going to. I think actually you're going to pay for people who had the opportunity to see it.
All right,
is that right?
I don't know about. I think you're actually paying for the net of who watched.
How do you know who saw it? Online? There's 6 ads on the page.
No, it's like a YouTube. You know, it's like pre-roll, but with an additional layer of
Oh,
metrics.
for
video.
For video.
No, this is all for
okay.
video.
Yellow card.
Yeah.
Yellow card.
I'm saying, look, I'm going to throw the yellow card back at you.
Because, what are they talking?
Because that's why just a total opportunity to see an impression. This is a much more qualified look. I don't work for Google. I just think it's a great innovation that we're seeing. And there's so much money that's been spent. I think it's something around $12 billion over the past 3 years on digital technologies, in terms of ad stacks and all the different things. It's jargon I'm still learning because I've, again, been at Annalect 2 months. But it's so exciting to, you know, just to be in this industry and to look at this change. And just my message would be, hey, GRP is a good starting point, but don't settle for just that. We got to keep evolving from that. We got to look at the whole customer engagement funnel, and we got to make sure that, you know, we're measuring. You know, as Chad said, each campaign is going to be a little different, and so, you know, the different marketers are going to have different objectives. If you're just looking on a GRP basis, to me, it's a little too blunt of an instrument.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to build on that and say that, yeah, I think GRP is a starting point, and it's not the end point. I just liken it to, you know, what the GRP tells you is, say you're buying a house, right? I mean, the GRP tells you you're buying a 2,000 square foot house, but it doesn't tell you if the house is 2 feet wide and 1,000 feet deep, or if it's actually 20 by 100, right? So 20 by 10. So you know, like, is it a square house or is it a line house? You know, so that's why, like, even just peeling it away to reach in frequency we think is important, but that's just the starting point. I think, you know, big data and other innovations are the way that we're going to be able to measure things better in the future.
Yeah, I was walking down 42nd Street the other day. I looked up, you know, as up to Times Square, and I saw, you know, 30,000 neon signs, and I had this sort of thought, you know, hey, I just theoretically was exposed, okay, to every one of those, right? That's what the IAB measure, online measure, would say, right? Mm-hmm. So even an exposure isn't an exposure anymore online. You don't know how long, and it goes to the quality point. Is the house, you know, was it thin? Was it a long time? Was it a long duration? You know, what are some of the other elements of quality that we should be introducing, or that marketers should care about, right? What aspects that qualify an exposure should be in the equation that aren't in the equation today? You can say pass if you want.
You know, I'd say, interestingly, I don't think those measures of impact have really changed all that much in terms of what we're looking for. You know, we're still kind of going up and down the purchase funnel and the attitudinal funnel. And that's the kind of thing that's very interesting, where there haven't been a lot of new kind of dimensions of impact that we're really looking for. We will use kind of easily obtainable measures of impact, like, the impact of digital exposure on website visitation or on purchase behavior. We try to, drive further into the funnel, but, marketers know that, brand resonance is a lot of attitudinal measures, and I'm just not seeing that there's been a lot of movement forward on changing that, which is not a bad thing. It's just something that is observed.
Well, and I think that gets back a little bit to what are we trying to change and what's the behavior. I know we talk a lot about the funnel, but there's also been a lot of discussion around the funnel being broken. I think McKinsey talked yesterday, so it's not linear. So how do you track that in kind of the customer journey model, one? And then I think the second part to that is, again, experimenting with the outcomes you want. We've been playing a lot with Bluefin, and Bluefin is one of the outcomes, the qualifying variables is actually just discussion. And if that discussion around the TV program in relationship to your brand is something you're trying to achieve, well, we can measure that now. What I'm waiting for is, great, people are talking about it, but again, how does it actually get to sales and dollars? Because as a marketer, that's what my bonus is contingent on, right? And I haven't seen the full closure of the loop, but we're getting there.
Well, and the only other thing, and just because I spent so long in research, I got to bring it up, is when you're talking about social media, to me, so many of those things are sort of like online focus groups, because
Yes.
how representative is that of anything? And it's really challenging, because I've looked at studies from Bluefin and Collective Annalect and Radian and all these guys, and it's sort of, it's hard to compare compare them when you're talking about social impact.
But we could say that about any measurement, right, to some degree, right? The quality of panels is eroding to some degree. Someone talked about focus groups and who are these people at the Super Bowl that aren't drinking beer and watching it. You always kind of wonder a little bit about these respondents and the actual sample. So I think whether it's social focus groups, online qual, or traditional panel research, or even set-top box data to some degree, sample's always going to be a concern in addition to instrumentation.
Well, thanks for the segue. So because he said it, from a set-top box point of view, I think this is great, because you're looking at the evolution of all this sort of media measurement from, very small panels, which are good and well put together, but to this world where now we have set-top box data. We're going to have measurement on tablets that should be more robust, but needs to make sure, as an advertiser, you need to make sure that that data is out there and that it's available for you to use in terms of evaluating the campaigns that you may have. And then you have interactive TV, which, I've been around a while and we've been talking about it for a long time, but it really seems like it's coming. And to me, you see more of the digital models coming to TV than the other way around. And
yeah,
so
that's really the fascinating part of it. And just because we're getting a little into minutia, the traditional way we all know TV is measured is you've got meters installed in homes, and people use some kind of push button methodology or diaries to capture the viewing. And what the industry is kind of moving towards is more of a census-based measurement, where we're gathering data directly from set-top boxes, which are digital, and have a return path capability that give us more of a perspective into what people are viewing at a more granular level. It's not the same as having a metered household, right? You don't necessarily have the demographics. You may not have everything that you want, but the advantages are if you think about addressable advertising, which many marketers really are interested in, which is your advertisement is only going to the people you want to reach, so these kind of qualified people. You need a census-like sample. You need a census. Why am I saying sample? You need a census to measure that, to know, oh, it went there, but it didn't go here. Okay, that's a good thing. So that's I think, a big change that we're seeing begin to take hold in the industry.
On your question, Ted, which this is generated, which is measuring quality. I mean, we've gone the path from GRPs are too much of a blunt instrument, and then frequency effects, of course, and then impact, and then you really ask the question about what about impact. I mean, set-top box is good because you get somebody, I guess, as we used to say in media, in their aperture, or at least you understand their aperture, if they're ready to receive and what was the moment. A simple example of that we've seen in something like quick serve restaurant is that the impacts of what we measure have time of day differences, of course. Everybody can understand that, right? Taco Bell, kind of a weird analogy, but the CMO of Taco Bell one time told us, I almost want people at lunchtime to our commercials to be so good that they want to lick the screen. Kind of a weird image, right? But I mean, talk about getting, you know, in their aperture. And so Ted, when we ask about quality of the impact, it's really situational. And again, that becomes more detailed, more larger data, more passive measurement, more whole programs like touch points, et cetera, that are out there now about what is somebody doing right now in their receipt of the ad, and what do we as an industry do in analyzing that to say that, you know, in your example, Ted, that you received those messages or you didn't. You know, because what you're saying is that, were any of these in my aperture right now situationally? Was I ready for them, and did they have impact? It is the ultimate question on impact and how we evaluate it in marketing accountability.
And just to build on the Touchpoints thing, the tools have gotten a lot better, right? Because Touchpoints is a program, it's something called the Media Behavior Institute, and they give people basically little, you know, iPhones or iPod Touches to measure their exposure and their interaction with media and what type of mood they're in. So one of the, you know, they've just launched this service in the U.S. within the past year or so, and we've been using it to look at, you know, social media usage, and then by demographic, what are their moods and their, you know, engagement levels with social media. So in addition to just using a bluefin or someone who's measuring all the chatter, you can look beyond that at some qualitative measures of that. So that's thing one on the measurement front. And thing two is, a couple people have alluded to connecting stuff to ROI, and lots of people out there, whether it's Nielsen, whether it's Kantar or TRA, are connecting a lot of these advertising messages and whatnot to actually moving of goods, right, which is what you're interested in. And I think we're starting to get down that path, and that's, I think, a really good development.
That's interesting. Okay, now I want to switch gears just a little bit here, but there's a strong connection. How many of you are interested in this idea of paid versus owned versus earned media as sort of your way of thinking about how you know, chop up the problem? Not really. That's fascinating. Very small.
6.
6. Wow. Sorry, I'm a measurement guy. I had to ask. Well, I guess we'll just.
Why aren't more people interested?
You can't ask them why.
Ashley?
Say that again.
It's the wrong question. Overall, the strategy is how do we put the right messages to our consumers when they want to see them. If I can find them on Facebook, if I can find them on their blogs, I'll find them there.
But who says that your message is amplified by someone on Facebook has anything to do with that was their audience, not your audience?
I don't think she's talking about amplification. She's talking about receptivity.
Right.
It's not how do I manage those different owned and paid channels. It's the other lens of how are the people I want to reach consuming media, and where do I fit into that stream? So they drive if it's paid, owned, or earned. I can't plan that way until I know their life cycle, which I think you guys are already there, is an area that's solely horribly, horribly lacking now that there's multiple.
So you're not allocating on that basis? Because I hear it all the time. Well, help us allocate across paid, owned, earned. And I'm a little miffed, I'm a little baffled by the question sometimes as well. We talked about this earlier. So let me just put this to the panel. Is that a good way to think about media? And if your answer is no, explain to me why it seems to be in every headline.
Well, okay. I think some kind of another place where the measurement companies really could do a better job is the timing of media exposures. I mean, we really don't do a lot with that. And when you look at the trends of, you know, when consumers are using media on different devices, you know, you begin to see why the industry is able to claim that there's not a whole lot of cannibalization going on when consumers cross screens, because basically they're creating new, I'm going to use a television word, you know, new day parts of usage information. And I think we've really not done a good job of you know, data visualization when we're trying to characterize consumers for a brand and let you know, how they are transitioning through their media day and where is the appropriate time to advertise and on what, you know, kind of going further than that, on what platform. You know, and that's sort of a new construct that I think we need to do a better job reporting on. So I'm not answering your question at all, but there you go.
It's all right. Paid, owed, earned. Important or red herring created by the press?
It's a way of the industry getting its arms around something that is different. What we were used to before amplification and before the seemingly perpetual motion machine of advocacy electronically was a model that said, here's CPM, here's frequency, here's reach, here's impact, we can figure it out, right? And so come to us, even things that are less traditional, like mobile and things like that, pretty much fit into that model. But there are some things, especially around earned, but somewhat around owned, where one of these things is not like the other. So how do we handle it, so to speak, in our thinking and in our spend allocation as well? Because even in owned, it seems like we're all struggling with the gold medalist model, meaning how do we hook onto something that is truly, quote, viral or have great pass along? And that seems like a crapshoot. It seems like we're winning the lottery, you know? And we're just beginning to come to systematic ways of planning earned and thinking about turning the model a bit on its head around amplification and pass along. In those ways. So I think it's so new that I don't know if people are budgeting on those categories, but they're trying to fit it in an apples-to-apples way into a model which is more CPM, reach, response curve based. And it might not just fit in exactly that way, and that's, I think, the struggle so far.
Right. It's okay. I think we have Kathy Looming here, so maybe we'll let each of these folks respond to that same question.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we'll see if the audience has anything that they want to.
Yeah, I'll let you know if we have time. But go ahead.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think paid, earned, and owned, I am seeing some clients try to allocate against it lightly, right? I mean, they're keeping the traditional buckets, but they're kind of thinking in kind of a superstructure in a way. And I agree with your comment about, there are some differences in that. I don't know if it's the wrong model, but I think it's somehow complementary and we should keep both in mind. Really, I think the paid, earned, owned model was born out of this question: what's the value of a like? My Facebook fan is how much worth, right? I think that's where it came. If I hear that one more time, I'm going to vomit.
But there's a simple answer: not much.
Right, but I think what happens there is we're trying to find shortcuts for reach to make our money go farther, right? And so we're again trying to connect earned with sales with reach. And I think that's still the wrong way of going about social to the panel yesterday. So paid, earned, and owned, good as possibly a superstructure, good in understanding how they relate to one another, born out of a Facebook fan value probably. And that's my paid, earned, owned POV.
I'm going to say something different, and I hope a little bit thought-provoking. I'm not going to answer the question. I'm just going to say it at the outset. But when we were doing our pre-discussion, we were talking about Apple Computer, and I don't know if you guys have seen, or it's actually Orbitz. In the Wall Street Journal this week, there was a big front-page story about how Orbitz was charging different, or displaying different rates for different hotels and packages for different users based on the computer they use. And I thought it was fascinating. I just thought from a data point of view, and everyone talks about big data, and a targeting point of view, that Mac users would see a higher priced package potentially than PC users. And so I sent it to a couple of my friends that are huge Apple devotees, and they were so offended that such a thing would happen. And I said, well, how is this any different than someone having an IE browser or a Chrome browser or a Firefox browser? You're just rendering an ad differently or a page differently, and they're rendering their offers differently. And they do have a mechanism where you can see them all equally. But just the amount of controversy that generated, I thought was fascinating. We had a really lively discussion about that.
Yeah, on privacy. All right, are we about done?
We have
questions
one,
from the audience?
One question. We're going to take one question.
Wow. Hi, my name is Randy Kilgore. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Tremor Video, and I'm also the Vice Chair of the IAB. So my question is more with that hat on. I think it's interesting. Well, let me first stipulate that a lot of what you talked about comes after a more common measurement system is in place. But 2 weeks ago, I was in Chicago, and the 4As, the IAB, and the ANA all came together, had a meeting. They devoted 1/3 of their time to the initiative called Making Measurement Make Sense. And I just find it interesting that in a discussion around managing the media measurement disconnect, that initiative didn't come up at all. So two-part question. One, is it just because, why didn't it come up in this context? And two, assuming you're familiar with it and you have a point of view on it, if you do, what is your point of view? Will it have an impact on the industry as a whole, or what do you think its impact will be?
It was all about that, because what that initiative does, or the main piece of that initiative, is the idea of making exposures more accurate. Essentially, don't count impressions that no one could possibly have seen, right?
Yeah,
and there's nobody who thinks that we should count impressions as weight that no one could possibly have seen.
Yeah, I think we did talk about an earlier question about, we didn't actually name the organization, and maybe we should have, about digital advertising being actually viewable, and that's the kind of advertising that should count, and the extent to which that is creates more of an equivalency measure across the television and the digital platforms. So we probably should have called out the organization that really spearheaded that.
3MS is fabulous.
Yeah.
Everybody, I think we all agree we need the standard, and it's going to make things better. So.
And the other thing, is I think that event was interesting because it brought together people that the awareness of 3MS isn't really high, and I think that event and bringing those different constituencies together was really helpful because I heard people talking about it after the fact, and I think that's positive.
Yeah, I mean that was the subtext of part of my question, like how visible is it? Like, were you aware of it? And then, but viewable impressions is just a precursor to getting to the end result, right? You have to have that in order to get to a GRP that measures across multiple different medias. It will never measure all. There'll always be new things coming up, and it'll be individual brands that have to make decisions about how to measure the impact of their own efforts. But it's just such a, I just thought it was fascinating. It's such a big initiative, right? These guys have poured millions and millions of dollars into it. You all are, certainly comScore and Nielsen have a huge interest in seeing what the outcome.
Oh yes, we do have a huge, and we're responding to this initiative. We love when the industry makes these quality issues a high priority because that gives us a goal, and we can try to address it best we can.
Okay, well, I want to thank the panel. Thank you, panel.
This will be a good roundtable too. So thanks a lot, you guys. I think measurement is one of our roundtable topics. So if we didn't solve measurement now, we'll just solve it, in about an hour and a half. So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, you guys. So if you have not signed up for an activity, please do so now. You might have seen my